Once upon a time, in a quiet village where the road curved gently like a tired ribbon, there lived a woman named Chisholm. Most people did not notice her at first, and when they did, they often looked away. Chisholm had no house to return to at night, no door with a lock, no window with light shining through it. She slept near an old roadside shelter where the roof leaked when it rained and the wind spoke loudly after sunset. The ground beneath her was hard, and the nights were colder than people imagined. But Chisholm woke up every morning, and she woke up kind. She greeted the sun as if it were an old friend. She stretched her tired arms, brushed the dust from her clothes, and whispered a quiet thank you for being alive. Hunger was her constant companion, but she never let it harden her heart. Long ago, before life turned its back on her, Chisholm had been someone else. She had once lived in a small room with painted walls. She had once owned shoes that were not torn and clothes that did not fade. She had once laughed freely, believing that the world was fair and that hard work always led to happiness. She had once dreamed of a family, but dreams, like glass, can shatter when dropped too hard. Loss came suddenly, then loss came again, and again, until Chisholm found herself standing alone, holding nothing but memories and the strength to keep going. People said she was unlucky. Others said she was cursed. But Chisholm knew the truth. Life had tested her, and she had survived. Each day, she walked through the village offering help where she could. She swept small spaces in exchange for scraps. She carried water when someone was kind enough to ask. She watched children play and smiled, even when their laughter reminded her of what she did not have. Some villagers pitied her. Some avoided her. Some mocked her openly. "There goes the woman with nothing," they whispered. But Chisholm never answered them. She believed that silence was sometimes stronger than words. She believed that kindness, even when unnoticed, mattered. In the evenings, when the sky softened into shades of orange and gray, Chisholm returned to her spot by the road. Cars passed quickly, carrying people with places to go and homes to return to. She watched them disappear into the distance, wondering where each one ended up. Sometimes, she imagined a life beyond the road. Sometimes, she imagined children running toward her, calling her name. Sometimes, she imagined that someone somewhere remembered her. But she never stayed in those thoughts for long. Hope, she had learned, could hurt if held too tightly. That evening began like any other. The air was calm. The road was quiet. The village was settling into its usual rhythm. Chisholm sat near the shelter, folding her hands together to keep them warm. She was thinking about nothing in particular when she heard it. A sound that did not belong. First, it was faint, a broken noise carried by the wind. She tilted her head, listening carefully. There it was again, crying. Chisholm stood up slowly. The sound was coming from down the road, beyond the curve where the trees grew thick and the light faded early. Most people avoided that part of the road at night. Accidents happened there. Silence lingered longer than it should. Chisholm hesitated. She was tired, hungry, alone. But the crying came again, clearer this time. Her heart tightened. "That is not the sound of trouble," she whispered. "That is the sound of need." Without another thought, Chisholm began to walk. Each step was careful. The ground was uneven, and her shoes were thin. The sky darkened as she moved forward, but she did not stop. The crying grew louder, sharper, filled with fear and confusion. Then she saw it. A car. It had left the road and crashed into a tree. The front was crushed. The doors were bent at strange angles. Glass lay scattered like broken ice across the ground. Chisholm's breath caught in her throat. She rushed forward, her fear replaced by urgency. And then she saw them. 2 small bundles lying near the side of the road. 2 babies. Twins. Their faces were red from crying. Their tiny hands waved weakly in the air. The blankets wrapped around them were thin and dirty, as if they had been placed there in a hurry. For a moment Chisholm froze. She had nothing. No home. No money. No security. What could she possibly give to 2 children? Then one of the babies cried louder, and something inside her broke open. Chisholm dropped to her knees and gathered them into her arms. one on the left, one on the right. Their bodies were warm, fragile, real. She held them close, rocking gently, whispering words she did not know she still remembered. "It's okay," she murmured. "You're not alone." The crying softened. The babies pressed closer to her chest, as if they recognized safety when they felt it. Chisholm felt tears spill down her face. She did not know where their parents were. She did not know what the night would bring. But she knew one thing with complete certainty. She could not leave them. Voices appeared in the distance. Lights flashed. People gathered around the wreckage. Someone spoke in a low, serious tone. Someone else shook their head. The truth arrived quietly, like a heavy blanket. Their parents were gone. The twins had no one but her. As the crowd murmured, someone turned to Chisholm. "You can't keep them," a voice said. "You have nothing." Chisholm looked down at the babies in her arms. They had stopped crying. They were sleeping, trusting her. "I may have nothing," she said softly, "but they have me." The night grew deeper, and without knowing it, without planning it, without asking the world for permission, Chisholm became a mother, not by blood, not by comfort, but by choice. And once upon a time, on a quiet road that most people ignored, a story began that would one day silence an entire village and change lives forever. But for now, there was only a woman, 2 babies, and love strong enough to survive anything. The night did not end when the crying stopped. If anything, it only grew heavier. Chisholm sat by the road long after the crowd thinned and the flashing lights disappeared. The air was cold now, pressing against her skin, but she barely felt it. Her arms were wrapped tightly around the twins, holding them as if the world itself might try to take them away if she loosened her grip. They slept against her chest, breathing softly. Each breath felt like a promise. People had spoken around her, voices filled with doubt, concern, and judgment. But those words faded into the background. All Chisholm could hear was the gentle rise and fall of the baby's breathing and the steady beat of her own heart. She had never held children this small before. Their bodies were fragile, light as air, yet the weight of responsibility pressed down on her harder than hunger ever had. Her arms ached, her back protested, and fear crept quietly into her thoughts. What would she do when they woke up hungry? What would she do when they cried again? What would she do tomorrow? She pushed the questions aside. Tomorrow had never been promised to her anyway. Carefully, Chisholm stood and began the slow walk back toward the roadside shelter. Each step was measured. She shielded the twins from the wind with her body, adjusting her grip whenever they stirred. The shelter was small and broken, barely standing, but it was all she had. She spread her old cloth on the ground and sat down, cradling the twins in her lap. She hummed softly, an old tune she remembered from a lifetime ago. The babies shifted. One let out a small cry. Chisholm's heart jumped. She rocked gently, whispering soothing words. "I'm here," she said over and over again. "You're safe." The cry faded. Relief washed over her like warm rain. That night, Chisholm did not sleep. She watched the twins as the stars moved slowly across the sky. She counted their breaths. She memorized their faces, the curve of their cheeks, the tiny fingers curled against her skin. She wondered who their parents had been. Were they kind? Were they scared in their final moments? Had they known their children would survive? Tears slipped down her face, landing silently on the ground. "I will love them," she whispered into the darkness, "for as long as I can." Morning arrived quietly. The sun crept up, casting light over the road and the shelter. Birds called from nearby trees, unaware that something extraordinary had happened during the night. The twins woke together. Their cries were louder now, sharper with hunger. Chisholm's stomach twisted. She had nothing to give them. No milk, no food, no money, only herself. She wrapped them securely and began to walk through the village. Her feet were sore, her clothes worn, but she did not slow down. She knocked on doors she had avoided before. She swallowed her pride and asked for help. Some people turned away immediately. Others stared at the babies, surprised. A few offered small kindnesses, warm water, old cloth, a little food. It was not much, but it was enough to keep the twins quiet for a while. By the afternoon, word had spread. The homeless woman had taken in 2 children. People gathered in small groups, whispering and pointing. Some shook their heads. Some laughed quietly. "She cannot even take care of herself," one woman said. "She will give up in a week," another replied. "Those children are better off elsewhere." Chisholm heard everything. She kept walking. That evening, she returned to the shelter exhausted. The twins slept fitfully, waking often, crying loudly. Each cry felt like a knife in her chest. She rocked them. She sang. She whispered stories she made up on the spot. Stories about brave children who survived storms and found homes full of light. She told them stories because she needed to believe them too. Days passed, then weeks. Chisholm learned quickly. She learned how to hold 2 crying babies at once. How to warm water with nothing but sunlight. How to soothe fear with nothing but patience. How to smile even when her body begged her to rest. She named them Hope and Grace one quiet morning as the sun rose. Hope because she needed something to believe in. Grace because she believed kindness was still possible. The names felt right. They felt like prayers. Life did not become easier. If anything, it became harder. Food was never enough. Sleep was rare. Rain soaked through the shelter and into her bones. Some nights, Chisholm cried silently, afraid she would fail them. But every time she thought about giving up, she looked at their faces. And she stayed. The village continued to watch. Some people softened over time. They offered small help. A bowl of food. An old blanket. Advice spoken gently. Others grew harsher. "They are not yours," someone snapped one afternoon. "You are wasting your life," another said. "Why suffer for children that are not your blood?" Chisholm lifted her head. "They are my responsibility," she said calmly. And that was enough. Hope and Grace grew slowly. Their cries turned into quiet sounds. Their eyes began to follow her movements. They reached for her fingers and held on tightly. When Chisholm smiled, they smiled back. When she sang, they calmed. Something inside her healed. She was still homeless, still poor, still tired, but she was no longer alone. At night, she lay awake beside them, watching the moonlight touch their faces. She thought about the future she could not see. Would they survive? Would they grow strong? Would the world be kind to them? She did not have answers, but she had a promise. "I will stay," she whispered one night, pressing a kiss to each small forehead. "No matter what." And as the twins slept peacefully beside her, Chisholm understood something deep and powerful. Love did not ask for permission. Love did not wait for comfort. Love arrived quietly, placed 2 small hearts into her hands, and trusted her to protect them. And she did, with everything she had, and everything she was. By the time Hope and Grace were a few months old, the village no longer whispered. It spoke openly. Chisholm felt the weight of those voices everywhere she went. On the road, near the wells, outside the small shops where she sometimes stood hoping for leftover food. People did not lower their voices when she passed. They did not hide their opinions. She is not their mother. She cannot give them a future. She is selfish for keeping them. Some days the words cut deeper than hunger. Other days, Chisholm pretended not to hear them at all. Each morning began the same way. Chisholm woke before sunrise, her body stiff and sore from the hard ground. She checked the twins first, always the twins. She touched their chests lightly, counting their breaths until relief settled in her chest. Only then did she allow herself to breathe. Hope slept quietly, his tiny fists curled as if holding on to dreams. Grace slept more restlessly, her brow often wrinkled, as if the world already asked too much of her. Chisholm smiled at them both. "You are safe," she whispered, "as long as I am here." Her days became a careful balance of survival and care. She learned when the sun was warm enough to heat water. She learned which corners of the village were kind and which were not. She learned how to stretch a small piece of food into something that lasted. Sometimes she ate nothing at all. She told herself she was not hungry, but her body knew the truth. There were nights when the twins cried endlessly, their small bodies tense with discomfort. Chisholm walked back and forth, rocking them until her legs shook. Sweat ran down her back. Tears blurred her vision. "I'm sorry," she whispered over and over. "I'm trying." No one saw those moments. No one saw her exhaustion. No one saw her fear. No one saw the strength it took to stay standing. What they saw was a homeless woman holding children that were not hers. And they judged. One afternoon, a woman from the village stopped in front of Chisholm, arms crossed tightly. "Why do you insist on this?" she asked sharply. "You cannot raise them properly. Give them to someone who can." Chisholm looked down at the twins, then back up. "They are not objects," she said quietly. "They are lives." The woman scoffed. "Love does not feed children." "No," Chisholm replied, "but it keeps them alive long enough for food to matter." The woman walked away shaking her head. Chisholm sat down slowly, her heart racing. She was afraid, not because of the woman's words, but because a small part of her wondered if they were right. What if she failed? What if her love was not enough? What if one day the twins needed more than she could give? That night, rain poured heavily. The shelter leaked, water dripping onto the ground beside them. Chisholm used her own body to shield the twins, curling around them as best she could. Her clothes were soaked. Her teeth chattered. But the twins stayed dry. When morning came, Chisholm was burning with fever. Her head ached. Her limbs felt heavy. Standing took effort. Still she moved. She wrapped the twins close and walked through the village, her steps slower than usual. Some people noticed her weakness. A few felt pity. A woman handed her a blanket without saying a word. A man placed a small bag of food near her feet and walked away. Chisholm's eyes filled with tears. Kindness, when it appeared, felt overwhelming. That day, she nearly collapsed while sitting under a tree. She leaned back, dizzy. The twins pressed against her chest. Panic rose in her throat. What would happen to them if she fell asleep and did not wake up? She forced herself to stay alert, humming softly, rocking gently. By evening, the fever eased. She survived. And so did they. As the months passed, the twins grew stronger. Their cries softened. Their eyes brightened. They recognized Chisholm's voice and turned their heads toward her when she spoke. When she smiled, they smiled back. When she laughed softly, they responded with tiny sounds that felt like music. That was when Chisholm truly understood. They knew her. She was not just a woman holding them. She was home. One day, as she bathed them carefully with warm water, she spoke their names out loud. "Hope," she said, touching the boy's cheek. "Grace," she whispered, brushing the girl's hair. The names settled into her heart. Hope reminded her why she woke up each day. Grace reminded her why she kept forgiving the world. The village noticed the change in the twins. They were healthier, calmer, happier. Some people grew quiet. Others grew uncomfortable. "She is making them depend on her," someone muttered. "They will suffer later," another said. Chisholm listened without reacting. She knew suffering did not begin with love. It began with neglect. At night, she told the twins stories. Simple ones, spoken softly in the dark. Stories about stars that watched over lost children. About roads that led to brighter places. About families that were chosen, not born. She spoke of courage. She spoke of kindness. She spoke of a future where pain did not win. Sometimes, while she spoke, she believed those stories herself. There were moments, rare but painful, when doubt returned. When her body felt too weak. When the twins fell ill. When the world seemed determined to remind her of her limits. During one such night, Chisholm sat awake, holding Grace as she cried weakly. Fear wrapped tightly around her heart. "I don't know if I can do this," Chisholm whispered into the darkness. Hope stirred beside her. His small hand reached out, brushing against her arm. It was a simple movement, unplanned, unaware, but it felt like an answer. Chisholm closed her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, "I can." By the end of that year, the village could no longer deny it. The twins had survived. Because of her. Chisholm was still poor, still without a home, still judged by many. But she was something else now too. She was steady. She was determined. She was a mother, not because the world approved, but because two small hearts trusted her completely. And whether the village accepted it or not, Chisholm had already given her life to them. Freely, fully, without regret. Children do not grow all at once. They grow in moments, in small changes that only someone watching closely would notice. Chisholm noticed everything. She noticed when Hope began to sleep through the night, his breathing slow and steady like he trusted the world to keep turning. She noticed when Grace started watching people carefully, her eyes following movement with a seriousness that felt far too old for someone so small. She noticed the way they reached for her now, not in fear, but in comfort. By the time the twins could sit on their own, Chisholm's life had settled into a fragile routine. Every day was still uncertain, but each one began to carry a quiet purpose. She woke before sunrise, the twins curled against her sides. She checked their faces, their hands, their warmth. Only then did she stretch her aching back and begin the day. The roadside shelter was still their home, but Chisholm made it as gentle as she could. She kept it clean. She folded her few belongings neatly. She used old cloth to soften the ground where the twins slept. To others it was nothing. To the twins it was everything they had ever known. As Hope and Grace grew, they began to explore the world around them. They crawled across the dusty ground, their laughter rising like small bells whenever they discovered something new. A leaf, a stone, the sound of their own hands clapping together. Chisholm watched them with a mix of joy and fear. The world was not always kind. She stayed close, ready to pull them back if danger came too near. Some villagers softened when they saw the twins growing strong. A few smiled at them when they passed. A few offered advice or small help. Others did not change at all. "They don't belong here," someone said one afternoon. "She is raising them in shame," another added. "They will grow up just like her." Chisholm heard those words and felt them settle deep inside her chest. But she did not let them poison her heart. She believed that children were not shaped by where they slept, but by what they were taught. And she taught them everything she knew. She taught them to say thank you, even for small things. She taught them to share, even when there was little. She taught them to be gentle with animals and patient with people. She taught them to look others in the eye not with pride, but with dignity. When Hope pushed Grace aside while playing, Chisholm corrected him softly. When Grace grew quiet and withdrawn, Chisholm held her longer, whispering reassurance into her hair. "You are seen," she told them both. "You matter." On warm afternoons, Chisholm sat under a wide tree near the road and told them stories. She pointed to the sky and named shapes in the clouds. She spoke of faraway places she had never seen but believed existed. "The world is bigger than this road," she told them. "And one day you will walk it." The twins listened with wide eyes. They did not understand her words yet, but they felt her belief. As the years passed, Hope and Grace learned to walk. Their steps were unsteady at first, their laughter loud and fearless. Chisholm followed closely behind, arms always ready to catch them. When Hope fell and scraped his knee, Chisholm cleaned the wound and kissed it gently. When Grace cried at night from bad dreams, Chisholm stayed awake until her breathing slowed again. Sleep became a luxury, but Chisholm did not complain. Her body was often tired. Her hands were rough. Her face carried lines that spoke of struggle. Yet her eyes shone with purpose. One day, a group of children from the village gathered nearby. They stared openly at the twins, whispering and pointing. "Why do they live with her?" one asked. "Are they poor too?" another said. Hope stood taller even at his young age. Grace clutched Chisholm's dress, her fingers tight. Chisholm knelt beside them. "You are not less," she said firmly. "You are enough." Her voice was calm, but strong. The children drifted away, unsure how to respond. That night, Chisholm cried quietly after the twins fell asleep. The tears came without warning, heavy and unstoppable. She worried about their future, about school they could not afford, about safety she could not guarantee, about the pain they might face because of her circumstances. But she also remembered how far they had come. They were alive. They were loved. And that counted for something. When Hope and Grace began to speak, Chisholm listened carefully. Their first words were simple, but when Grace called her name for the first time, Chisholm had to turn away to hide her tears. She was not pretending anymore. She was their mother, not by law, not by approval, but by every act of care she had given them. As the twins grew older, Chisholm found small ways to teach them letters and numbers. She traced shapes in the dirt. She counted stones. She sang songs that helped them remember. Some villagers watched with curiosity. Others scoffed. "What future can come from dirt lessons?" someone said. Chisholm ignored them. She knew knowledge did not begin in buildings. It began in minds that were encouraged to learn. There were still days of deep hardship. Days when food ran out. Days when rain soaked everything. Days when Chisholm's body felt like it might finally give in. On those days, she held on to the twins a little tighter. They were her reason, and she was theirs. By the time Hope and Grace were old enough to run freely, the village could no longer deny what was happening. The twins were thriving. They were curious, polite, bright-eyed. They did not carry bitterness. They carried gratitude. Some villagers began to feel uncomfortable, not because Chisholm had failed, but because she had succeeded. "She has done the impossible," someone muttered quietly one evening. Chisholm heard those words too. She smiled to herself. She had not done the impossible. She had done the necessary. She had stayed. She had loved. And under the open sky, with nothing but determination and care, two small lives were becoming something strong and beautiful. Dreams do not arrive all at once. They begin as questions. Hope and Grace were no longer children who needed to be carried. They walked with confidence now, their steps steady, their eyes always searching the horizon. The roadside shelter that once felt like the whole world had slowly become too small for their curiosity. Chisholm noticed the change before anyone else did. She saw it in the way Hope lingered near passing cars, watching them disappear down the road. She saw it in the way Grace asked endless questions about places beyond the village, about cities, tall buildings, and people who lived lives far different from their own. "What's at the end of the road?" Grace asked one afternoon. Chisholm paused. "More roads," she answered gently. "And chances." Hope's eyes lit up. "Can people like us go there?" Chisholm smiled, though her chest tightened. "Yes," she said. "People like you can go anywhere." The twins grew taller, smarter, hungrier for knowledge. They learned quickly, faster than Chisholm ever expected. Teachers who passed through the village began to notice them. One of them stopped Chisholm one evening, surprise clear in his voice. "Those children are remarkable," he said. "They should be learning more than this place can offer." The words echoed in Chisholm's mind long after he left. That night, she sat awake while the twins slept. The moonlight touched their faces softly. She studied them the way she had on the night she found them, carefully, lovingly, with a heart full of fear and pride. She had always known this day would come. Love prepares you to let go. But knowing did not make it easier. Opportunities came slowly at first. Letters, conversations, promises that sounded too big to be real. Then one day it became certain. Hope and Grace had been offered a chance to study in the city. A real chance. A future. The twins were excited, nervous, unsure how to feel. Chisholm listened quietly as they spoke, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "You should go," she said finally. Grace looked up sharply. "You want us to leave?" Chisholm reached for her hands. "I want you to live." Hope swallowed hard. "What about you?" The question cut deep. Chisholm looked away for a moment, gathering her strength. "I will be okay," she said softly. "I have always been okay." It was only half a lie. The days before their departure passed too quickly. Chisholm helped them pack what little they owned. She mended their clothes carefully, stitching love into every thread. She reminded them of everything she had taught them. "Be kind," she said. "Be honest," she said. "Never forget where you came from." she said. Grace cried quietly at night, trying not to let Chisholm hear. Hope stayed awake, staring at the sky, pretending to be brave. On the morning they were to leave, the village gathered. Some people watched with curiosity, others with disbelief. The homeless woman raised children who are leaving us, someone whispered. Chisholm stood beside the twins, her posture calm, her heart breaking slowly. She hugged Hope first. Be strong, she whispered. Then Grace. Be gentle, she said. They held her tightly, afraid that if they let go, everything would disappear. We will come back, Grace promised. We will never forget you, Hope said. Chisholm nodded. I know, she replied. She watched as they walked down the road. Down the same road where she had once found them helpless and crying. Now they walked tall, carrying dreams bigger than the village could hold. When they disappeared from sight, Chisholm sat down slowly. The road felt empty. The shelter felt silent. For the first time in years, she was alone. The days that followed were the hardest of her life. There were no small footsteps to wake her, no questions to answer, no laughter to soften the silence. The shelter echoed with absence. People spoke again. They left her. She raised them for nothing. That is the world's reward. Chisholm listened quietly. At night, she spoke to the stars. Watch over them, she whispered. Let them be safe. Time passed. Letters came rarely, then more often. Stories of studies, struggles, successes. Hope and Grace wrote with excitement and gratitude, always ending with the same words. We miss you. We love you. Chisholm read each letter until the paper softened in her hands. Years moved forward. The twins grew into adults in a world far from the village. They learned how to survive in new ways. They learned discipline, ambition, and resilience. The same qualities Chisholm had taught them without realizing it. And Chisholm remained. She aged quietly. Her hair grayed. Her steps slowed. But her heart stayed open. Some villagers softened with time. Others felt uneasy. The woman they once mocked had raised children who had escaped poverty. And that truth was uncomfortable. One evening, Chisholm sat by the road as she always did. The sunset painted the sky with familiar colors. She smiled softly. I did my part, she whispered. She did not know what the future held. She did not know that the road would soon bring back everything she had given. But far away, in a city filled with lights and noise, two people carried her lessons in their hearts. And one day those lessons would lead them home. Time changes its pace when you are alone. For Chisholm, days stretched longer than they ever had before. Without Hope and Grace beside her, the mornings felt slower, the evenings heavier. The road still curved the same way. The shelter still stood in the same place. But everything else felt different, like the world had moved forward and forgotten to take her with it. She woke each day expecting to hear familiar sounds. Small footsteps, soft laughter, questions spoken with excitement. Instead, there was silence. Chisholm learned to live inside that silence. She folded her cloth neatly each morning, just as she always had. She washed her face at the stream. She greeted the sun quietly. Habit became her anchor, keeping her steady when memories threatened to pull her under. The village noticed her solitude. Some people felt pity. Others felt curiosity. A few felt satisfaction. They are gone, someone said casually one afternoon. She is alone again, another replied. Chisholm heard them. She did not respond. She had learned that waiting was not weakness. It was endurance. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. Chisholm aged gently but visibly. Her hair thinned and turned silver. Her hands grew rougher, her steps slower. Still, she kept moving. Still, she survived. She found small tasks to fill her days. She helped when she could. She listened more than she spoke. Children who once pointed at her now greeted her politely. Some even smiled. The twins' absence lingered in every corner of her life. When she cooked small meals, she cooked too much by habit, then stopped herself. When she found something interesting, she instinctively turned to share it, then remembered she was alone. At night, she often dreamed of them. In her dreams, Hope and Grace were still young, running toward her with open arms. She always woke before she could reach them. She would sit quietly afterward, breathing deeply until the ache softened. Letters arrived. Not often at first. The first one came folded carefully, written in uneven handwriting. Chisholm held it like something fragile and precious. "Mother," it began. She pressed the paper to her chest before reading further. The letters spoke of struggle and growth, of confusion and courage, of moments when the twins felt lost in a city that moved too fast. They wrote about long days and longer nights, about learning to stand on their own, about remembering her words when things became hard. "You taught us to keep going," Grace wrote once. "We hear your voice when we are afraid," Hope added in another letter. Chisholm read every word slowly, sometimes aloud, savoring each sentence. She answered each letter carefully, choosing her words with love. "Be patient, be kind, do not forget who you are." She never asked for money. She never asked for favors. She asked only one thing: stay true. The village watched her wait. Some people began to feel uneasy. "She still believes," someone whispered. "She still waits," another said. Years ago, her belief had been mocked. Now it made people uncomfortable, because belief that lasts is powerful. There were days when doubt crept in quietly, days when Chisholm's body ached more than usual, days when rain soaked her shelter and loneliness felt unbearable, days when she wondered if she would ever see them again. On those days, she sat by the road and stared into the distance. She remembered the night she found them. She remembered the years of sacrifice. She remembered the day she let them go. And she reminded herself, love does not demand proof. Love trusts. As time passed, Chisholm noticed subtle changes in the village. New buildings appeared. Old paths were repaired. The world moved forward, even if she remained where she was. Some villagers grew kinder. They brought her food occasionally. They asked about her health. They no longer laughed. Others avoided her gaze, burdened by guilt they did not want to face. One evening, a young woman sat beside Chisholm under the tree near the road. "Why do you keep waiting?" she asked quietly. Chisholm smiled gently. "Because waiting is how you make space for miracles." The woman said nothing after that. At night, Chisholm often spoke to the stars. "Are they safe?" she whispered. "Are they happy? Do they still remember me?" The stars never answered, but she spoke anyway. Years passed quietly. The letters grew fewer but longer. The handwriting became confident. The words became bold. Hope wrote of studies, of ideas, of ambitions that frightened and excited him. Grace wrote of challenges, of determination, of dreams that reached far beyond survival. They were no longer children. They were becoming something powerful. And Chisholm was proud. One day, a letter arrived that felt different. Chisholm opened it slowly, her hands trembling. "Mother," it read, "We are building something. We do not know where it will lead, but everything we do is shaped by you." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She folded the letter carefully and placed it among the others, a small collection of proof that love had not disappeared. As the years stretched on, the village began to speak differently about Chisholm. "She raised remarkable children," someone said quietly. "She must have done something right," another admitted. No one apologized, but respect began to replace mockery. Chisholm did not need apologies. She had peace. One afternoon, as she sat watching the road, she felt a strange sense of anticipation, like the air itself was holding its breath. She could not explain it. She only knew that waiting did not feel heavy anymore, felt expectant. She stood slowly, leaning on the tree for support, and gazed down the road. Nothing happened, yet her heart remained calm. Whatever was coming would come in its own time. The morning began like every other. The sky was pale and calm. The road lay quiet, stretching forward without promise or warning. Chisholm rose slowly from her resting place, brushing dust from her clothes and steadying herself as her knees complained. Age had settled into her bones, but not into her spirit. She washed her face at the stream and returned to her spot near the wide tree by the road. Waiting had become second nature. She did not expect anything. That was why the sound startled her. At first, it was distant, a low hum that did not belong to the village. Chisholm tilted her head, listening carefully. The sound grew louder, deeper, stronger, carrying a weight that made the ground seem to vibrate beneath her feet. Engines. Not one. Several. Villagers began to step outside their homes, drawn by the unfamiliar noise. Doors creaked open. Conversations paused. Faces turned toward the road. Chisholm remained seated. She had learned not to rise for every curiosity. The sound grew closer. Then the first car appeared around the bend. Black, polished, powerful. It moved slowly, deliberately, as if aware of every eye watching it. Behind it came another, then another. 3 luxury cars rolled into the village, their surfaces catching the sunlight like mirrors. A hush fell. People stared openly now, disbelief written across their faces. "Who are they?" someone whispered. "Why would cars like that come here?" another asked. Chisholm watched quietly, her heart beating steadily, though she did not know why. The cars stopped near the center of the village. Doors opened. Men in neat suits stepped out, scanning the area with calm, measured expressions. Their presence felt heavy, not threatening, but important. Chisholm shifted slightly, curiosity stirring despite herself. Then 2 more doors opened. 2 men stepped out together. They were tall, confident, dressed simply but elegantly. Their movements were controlled, their posture straight. They looked like men who knew exactly where they were going. Their eyes moved across the village slowly, taking everything in. Then they saw her. Chisholm felt it before she understood it. A tightening in her chest, a sudden stillness in the air, a feeling she had not known in years. The men froze. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Hope stepped forward first. Grace followed closely beside him. The village watched, confused, as the 2 men walked past everyone else. Past the questions, past the stares, past the whispers. Straight toward the old woman sitting beneath the tree. Chisholm rose slowly, uncertainty flickering across her face. She squinted, trying to see them clearly. The years had changed their faces, but not their eyes. Her breath caught. Her hands began to tremble. They stopped in front of her. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then both men knelt. "Mother," Hope said softly. The word shattered the silence. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Chisholm's knees nearly gave way. Grace reached for her hands, holding them gently, reverently, as if afraid she might disappear. "We are home," he whispered. Chisholm stared at them, her vision blurring. "My children?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Hope nodded, tears streaming freely down his face. "Yes," he said. "It's us." The village stood frozen. Some people recognized them now. Others did not understand at all. But no one spoke. Chisholm reached out with shaking hands, touching their faces, tracing their features as if making sure they were real. "You came back," she whispered. "We promised," Grace said. They embraced her carefully, mindful of her age, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Chisholm cried openly. She did not try to stop the tears. She had waited too long. Around them, the village buzzed with stunned murmurs. "Those are the children? They are men now. They came back for her." Chisholm leaned against Hope, overwhelmed. Grace supported her on the other side. "We missed you," Hope said. "Every day," Grace added. They guided her to sit, kneeling beside her, refusing to stand above her. They asked about her health, her days, her waiting. She answered softly, still in disbelief. "I knew you would return," she said. Grace smiled through tears. "We did too." One of the suited men approached quietly and placed a small bottle of water into Chisholm's hands. She barely noticed. All she could see were the faces she had carried in her arms so many years ago. The village shifted uncomfortably. Some people lowered their heads. Others stared, shame creeping into their expressions. These were the same children they had doubted. And this was the woman they had mocked. Hope stood slowly and turned toward the village. "We owe everything we are to her," he said calmly. "No anger, no accusation. Just truth. She fed us when she had nothing. She taught us when no one cared. She loved us when the world turned away." Silence followed. Grace added softly, "She is our mother." Chisholm reached for his sleeve. "That is enough," she whispered. Grace nodded and knelt again. The village exhaled. Nothing would ever be the same. Chisholm had waited through years of doubt, loneliness, and silence. And now, on an ordinary morning that began like any other, the road had finally given her back everything she had poured into it. The village did not know how to breathe again. People stood frozen in small groups, eyes moving between Chisholm and the two men kneeling before her. The road that had always been ordinary suddenly felt like a stage, and everyone realized they were witnessing something they would never forget. Chisholm sat quietly beneath the tree, her hands still wrapped in Grace's, her heart pounding so loudly she feared others might hear it. She kept looking from one face to the other, afraid that if she blinked too long, they might vanish like a dream at dawn. Hope smiled gently, the same smile he had once worn as a child when she told him stories at night. "You look thinner," he said softly. Chisholm laughed through tears. "And you look taller than the sky." Grace chuckled, wiping his eyes. "You used to say that when we were small." "I meant it then," she replied. "I mean it now." People drew closer, unable to resist curiosity. Whispers filled the air again, but they sounded different this time. Less cruel, more uncertain. One elderly man stepped forward hesitantly. Are you truly her children?" Hope rose to his feet, standing tall, his voice calm and steady. "Yes," he said, "in every way that matters." Grace stood beside him. "She raised us. She protected us. She taught us how to live." Chisholm tried to interrupt, shaking her head slightly. "I only did what anyone should do." Hope turned back to her, kneeling again. "No," he said firmly, though his tone remained gentle. "You did what almost no one was willing to do." Silence returned. The villagers shifted uncomfortably. Hope continued, his voice carrying clearly. "When we had nothing, she gave us everything. When the world turned away, she stayed." Grace added quietly, "We survived because she refused to give up." Chisholm felt warmth spread through her chest. Part pride, part sorrow, part relief. She had never needed public praise. She had never asked for recognition. But hearing the truth spoken aloud felt like a long-closed wound finally healing. Someone in the crowd whispered, "They look important." Another murmured, "Those cars, they must be powerful men." Hope heard them. He turned to the village, not with anger, but with openness. "We left here as children with nothing but lessons," he said. "We went to the city and we worked. We failed. We tried again. Everything we became started here." He gestured toward Chisholm. "She taught us patience. She taught us honesty. She taught us dignity." Grace nodded. "When the world tempted us to forget who we were, we remembered her." Chisholm lowered her gaze, overwhelmed. One of the suited men approached quietly and offered her a chair. She hesitated, then allowed herself to sit. Her legs were trembling now, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Hope sat beside her, not above her. Grace remained kneeling. The message was clear. Respect. A young woman from the village stepped forward timidly. "All these years, you waited," she said to Chisholm. "Did you ever regret it?" Chisholm looked up slowly. "No," she said. "Not even once." Her voice was soft but sure. "I loved them," she continued. "Love does not ask for guarantees." Some people looked away. Others wiped their eyes. The truth was impossible to ignore now. A woman who had been mocked, avoided, and dismissed had raised two people the world now clearly valued. Hope took a deep breath. "There is something else we need to say," he announced. The village leaned in. "We are not just here to visit," Grace said. "We are here to honor her." Chisholm frowned slightly. "My son, I do not need." Hope placed his hand over hers. "Please," he said, Let us finish. He stood and spoke clearly. For years, people questioned her choices. They judged her love. They said she was foolish. His gaze swept across the crowd. Not accusing, just honest. We want everyone to know that every success we have belongs to her first. Murmurs spread like ripples in water. Chisholm felt tears slip down her cheeks again. She had waited so long for nothing more than their return. This moment felt larger than she could hold. Grace reached into his jacket and pulled out a small framed photograph. He handed it to her gently. It was old. A picture taken years ago, 3 figures beneath a tree. A woman sitting on the ground. 2 children leaning against her. Chisholm gasped softly. You kept this, she whispered. We kept everything, Hope said. The villagers leaned closer, recognition dawning. That tree, someone whispered. That's this place. Yes, Grace replied. This is where we learned what family meant. Chisholm pressed the frame to her chest. For the first time in her life she felt seen. Not pitted. Not judged. Seen. The air felt heavy with emotion. Even those who once spoke harshly found no words now. One man who had mocked her years ago stepped forward, his voice low. We were wrong, he said simply. Chisholm looked at him. She did not scold him. She did not smile in victory. She nodded. That is enough, she said. Grace exhaled slowly. You forgave long before today, he said. Chisholm met his eyes. Forgiveness keeps the heart alive. The village fell silent again. Hope helped her stand gently. She leaned on him, feeling how strong he had become. How steady. You carried us once, he whispered. Let us carry you now. She laughed softly. I am not that fragile. Maybe not, Grace said. But you are precious. The crowd slowly dispersed, whispers turning into quiet reflection. Children stared at Chisholm with new eyes. Adults avoided her gaze, not out of disrespect, but humility. The road looked the same, but everything had changed. Chisholm stood beneath the tree where her journey as a mother truly began, flanked by the children she had raised with nothing but love. The village did not return to normal after that day. Could not. Even after people drifted back to their homes, the air still felt charged, as if something invisible had shifted and settled into place. Whispers followed Chisholm wherever she went, but they were no longer sharp or cruel. They were careful, respectful, and sometimes filled with awe. Chisholm herself felt unsteady, not from age, but from the weight of attention. She had lived most of her life unnoticed, and now every eye followed her steps. She kept her gaze low, her manner gentle, the same woman she had always been. Hope and Grace stayed close to her side. They did not rush. They did not announce anything yet. They wanted her to breathe first. That afternoon, the 3 black cars remained parked at the edge of the village, gleaming quietly in the sunlight. Children gathered at a distance, staring at their reflections in the polished surfaces. Adults pretended not to look, though curiosity tugged at them relentlessly. Chisholm noticed the cars only when Grace guided her toward them. Come, he said softly. There is something we want to show you. She hesitated. I don't need to see them, she said gently. I'm happy just seeing you. Hope smiled. This is part of seeing us. They walked slowly toward the cars. Chisholm supported lightly on both sides. Each step felt unreal. She remembered standing on the same ground years ago, barefoot and exhausted, holding 2 hungry children while people looked away. Now those same people watched from a distance, silent. They reached the cars. 3 of them, perfectly clean, powerful. Still, Hope turned to face her. Mother, he said, his voice steady but full. Everything we are started with you. Before we tell the world anything else, we need to do this here, where it all began. Chisholm shook her head faintly. My son, I did not raise you for gifts. Grace reached into his pocket. And we did not succeed just to keep it from you. He opened his hand. Keys rested in his palm. Black, polished, heavy. For a moment, Chisholm did not understand what she was seeing. Hope took 1 set of keys and placed them gently into her trembling hands. This one, he said, pointing to the car closest to her. is yours. The world seemed to stop. The murmurs rose instantly. Gasps. Sharp breaths. Hands covering mouths. Chisholm stared at the keys as if they might burn her skin. No, she whispered. This is too much. Grace knelt beside her again, his eyes shining. Nothing could ever be too much for what you gave us. Hope spoke clearly now, his voice carrying across the village. This car is not a reward, he said. It is recognition. The words settled heavily. For years, he continued, this woman was mocked for loving children who were not her own. She was told she was foolish. She was told she was wasting her life. His gaze moved slowly across the gathered villagers, not accusing, but unflinching. She gave us dignity before we had names. She gave us belief before we had proof. She gave us a future before we could imagine one. Silence followed. Grace added softly, this car is not wealth. It is a reminder to us and to everyone here of who made us. Chisholm's hands shook harder now. Tears blurred her vision. I would have been content, she said quietly, just knowing you lived well. Hope bent closer to her. You taught us never to take credit alone, he said. Please let us honor you. For a long moment, Chisholm said nothing. She looked around the village, at the faces that once turned away, at the children who stared at her now with wonder, at the road where her life had broken and been rebuilt. Then she nodded, just once. Grace exhaled deeply, relief flooding his face. The village erupted not in cheers, but in something deeper. Emotion. Some people cried openly. Others lowered their heads. A few stepped back, shame written plainly on their faces. A woman who had once laughed at Chisholm pressed her hands together nervously. A man who had mocked her under his breath could not meet her eyes. The keys had done what words never could. They had silenced judgment. Hope opened the door of the car and helped Chisholm inside gently. The interior was quiet, soft, unfamiliar. She sat stiffly at first, afraid to touch anything. Grace laughed softly. You can relax, he said. It won't disappear. Chisholm placed her hands in her lap. I don't know how to use something like this, she admitted. Hope smiled. We will teach you, just like you taught us everything. Outside, villagers gathered closer, no longer pretending disinterest. She owns that? Someone whispered. The woman by the road? The one we laughed at? No one answered, because the answer was obvious. Chisholm stepped out of the car again slowly. The sun caught the metal, reflecting light across the ground. She looked small beside it, but somehow she also looked taller than ever before. She turned to the crowd. I did not love my children for this, she said, her voice calm. I loved them because they needed love. She paused. But if this teaches even one person to be kinder to someone with nothing, she continued, then it has meaning. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. The road that once watched her beg now watched her stand honored. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Chisholm sat beneath the tree again, this time with Hope and Grace on either side of her. The car stood nearby, quiet and waiting. She did not look at it much. She looked at them. My children, she said softly. You came back. Hope nodded. We always would. Grace added, the world could not make us forget you. Chisholm smiled. For the first time in her life, she felt no need to explain herself. No need to prove anything. Morning arrived gently, as if the world itself was careful not to disturb what had been healed. Chisholm woke to a stillness she was not used to. For years, mornings had begun with hunger, with stiffness in her bones, with the quiet worry of survival. Now, sunlight streamed through a window and rested softly on her face. A window. She sat up slowly, her heart fluttering. The room was simple but warm. A real bed, clean sheets, walls that did not sway with the wind. For a moment, she wondered if she was dreaming. Then she heard familiar voices outside. Hope laughed softly. Grace answered him. Chisholm closed her eyes. It was real. They had insisted she rest in a proper home near the village while they stayed to settle things. She had resisted at first, uncomfortable with comfort, but exhaustion had finally claimed her. Now she rose carefully and walked to the doorway. Hope noticed her immediately. "Mother," he said, standing. "Did you sleep?" "Yes," she replied, surprised by her own smile. "I truly slept." Grace handed her a cup of warm drink. "You deserve many years of that." She shook her head gently. "I have already been given more than I asked for." The village had changed overnight. People greeted her differently now. Some bowed their heads. Some smiled shyly. Children ran toward her instead of away from her. She felt awkward under the attention, but she did not reject it. Hope and Grace spent the days quietly. They repaired old paths, spoke with elders, and helped families who had once struggled like they had. They did not announce their plans loudly. They simply acted, and the village noticed. One afternoon, a man approached Chisholm hesitantly. "I owe you an apology," he said, unable to meet her eyes. "I spoke badly of you once." Chisholm studied his face for a moment. Then she nodded. "You are forgiven." That was all. No bitterness, no triumph, no lectures. Forgiveness had long ago taken root in her heart. As days passed, Hope and Grace shared pieces of their journey with her. They spoke of sleepless nights, of mistakes, of lessons learned the hard way. They spoke of how often they had remembered her voice when the world tempted them to forget humility. "When we first made real money," Hope admitted one evening, "we were afraid. Afraid of losing it," Grace added. Chisholm smiled knowingly. "That fear keeps you human." They told her how they had built companies that valued people, not just profit. How they had refused shortcuts that would cost others their dignity. "Everything we built," Grace said, "was shaped by how you raised us." Chisholm listened quietly, her heart full. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Hope placed a document on the table in front of her. "What is this?" she asked. "A home," he said simply. "In your name. Here. And anywhere else you wish." She pushed it back gently. "I don't need many places." Grace smiled. "Then this one will be enough." She looked at them both for a long time. "I hope you know," she said slowly, "that none of this is why I stayed." "We know," Hope replied. "That's why it matters." The village gathered one last time before the brothers returned to the city. Not for ceremony, but for gratitude. Food was shared. Stories were told. Laughter replaced the silence that once followed Chisholm everywhere. An elder stood and spoke quietly. "This woman showed us that wealth begins long before money," he said. Chisholm felt embarrassed and tried to wave it away, but Hope squeezed her hand. "Let them speak," his eyes said. When the day came for Hope and Grace to leave again, the road filled with people. Not to stare, but to send them off. Chisholm stood between her sons. "You are leaving again," she said softly. "Yes," Grace replied, "but not like before." "We know where home is now," Hope added. They hugged her tightly. "You will never wait alone again," Grace whispered. She nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "I never truly did." As the cars drove away, Chisholm did not feel the old ache of abandonment. She felt peace. That evening, she sat outside her home, watching the sky turn gold and purple. Children played nearby. Voices drifted through the air. She thought back over her life. The loss, the hunger, the night by the road, the tiny cries that changed everything. She smiled softly. People often measured success by what could be seen: cars, houses, power. But Chisholm knew better. She had been rich when she had nothing but love to give. And now, with children who returned, a village that learned, and a heart at rest, she was richer than she had ever imagined. Long after the sun disappeared, Chisholm whispered into the night, "Thank you. Not for wealth, not for recognition, but for love that came back." And in that quiet moment, the truth settled gently into the world. The woman once called homeless, the woman once mocked, the woman once ignored, was, and always had been, the richest woman alive. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to this channel and tell us where you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.